Good morning. Thanks for showing up this morning. Actually, it's a pretty good crowd for a short session on the first day in a lovely resort area. I'm a little more casual, less casual than the conch blower, but I think that's probably appropriate. So the title of this presentation may be a little scary, The End of Alumni. But what I'd like you to think about is what would a world without alumni look like? So no perhaps graduation ceremony, no 10-year reunion when students come back to campus, visit the local bookstore and buy a hoodie with Weatherhead School of Management alumnus on it, take part in discounts at local establishments around your university. If you think about it today, a student walks across the stage at graduation, and that's sort of when they turn from a student to an alumnus. And we typically are not that engaged with them after they cross the stage. We hand them a diploma, we hand them a transcript. They may use that transcript later when they're going to graduate school. They may use it to take professional exams. They may come back and do some additional learning with us, but largely we're sending them out into the world to make do on their own. Well, let's start thinking about things differently. We think that we should think more about learners as opposed to students and then alumni. And we think we need to think about that intentionally. Think of it as building a Hotel California-like ecosystem where learners enter but they can never leave, all right? So they stay with you throughout their career and even their lifetime. Certainly we do some of this today. So I haven't been in the classroom on a continuous basis for a decade, but I'm still in contact with many of my former students. Occasionally I get an email or a call for career advice, still to write reference letters occasionally, but we want to start thinking about doing it more intentionally. There's market forces out there that are making lifelong learning critical and changing this mindset from student alumni to learners. So let's talk about what some of those market forces are. So a study back about 5 years ago from some professors at Oxford, they built an algorithm when we were starting to have robotics and automation, and they looked at 700 different occupations, and they calculated the probability that a particular occupation could be totally automated. So I'm putting up just two numbers from their study, and again, they list 700 different occupations. The first is an occupational class that they estimated had a 99% probability of being automated. The second is one that had a 0.03% chance of being automated. What do you think the 99% represents? Any guesses? Accountants. Yes, so as a reformed accountant, I take that personally. But it turns out you're pretty close. Specifically within accounting, it's tax preparers. So think about it, in many countries today, you don't even have to fill out a tax return. Your employer, your bank, your investment company, they send documents to the government electronically, and they compute your taxes and settle up with you at the end of the year. Maybe you send in simply a postcard. So a very high risk of automation for that particular occupation. What about the one that's 0.03%? Any guesses? Yoga teachers. Well, that's an interesting one because I have a yoga app on my iPad, but it is a live teacher, but presumably you might have an avatar. So I think yoga teachers probably pretty close. In this case, it's mental health workers. So think about an occupation that requires that human touch. There are some things, certainly at least currently, that just aren't automatable. So imagine calling the suicide hotline and getting press 1 if you're depressed, press 2 if you're, et cetera, et cetera. Probably not ideal. A more recent study by McKinsey, this is last year, they estimated that there's 5% of occupations out there that could be 100% automated. But if we look broadly, about 60% of occupations consist of activities that are at least 30% automatable. So some pretty seismic changes going on. It's pretty clear that many jobs that exist today are not going to exist in the future. All jobs are going to look quite different as we continue to come up with ways of automating or subjecting things like artificial intelligence to some of the things we currently do. It doesn't mean we won't have things to do as humans. We certainly will, but there'll be higher value activities, those that really require that human touch. You know, we've seen in my industry, I started in accounting, moved into investment management. You're seeing these rise of robo-advisors. And many of my friends that are in the investment management industry are actually using the robo-advisors as sort of the backbone of their practice, but they're still in business because that human interaction is required so that you can counsel a client away from their behavioral biases to make mistakes when the market's down 10% and sell in panic. So there are some behavioral biases we all have as humans that other humans can be useful in helping mitigate. But clearly things are changing. Artificial intelligence, I briefly mentioned. AACSB recently issued a paper, a briefing paper on artificial intelligence. Our innovations committee, which consists of members from around the world, meets 3 times a year and has briefing papers, presentations, and discussions about these emerging technologies, those that have a potential impact to disrupt or enhance our industry. So we're publishing that as we create it. So this is on our website. I would encourage you to take a look at it. You'll see soon an additional paper on virtual reality and augmented reality. And then probably later this year, we'll produce one on micro-learning, which is something I'm going to talk about in the future. But clearly, there are changes in the nature of the workforce. Today, there are companies that didn't exist a decade ago. Blue chip companies that we thought of in the past have gone by the wayside. Jobs that existed 10 years ago don't exist today. And this trend is likely to continue, which requires that learners get continuously reskilled to keep up with what's going on in the changing nature of the jobs that we're doing. The workforce is changing as well. So as I mentioned, I started my career in public accounting. It was a pretty simple workforce then. It was a pyramid. You started as a staff accountant, and a small percentage of you moved on to senior accountant, to manager, eventually to partner. A pyramid structure, and you typically stayed with the firm for many years. A partner takes on average, at most big firms, about 10 years. Today, and this is a slide from Ellen Glazerman that looks at the public accounting workforce today, that there still is something of a traditional workforce, but they also have a virtual workforce. People that are working in other countries where we're outsourcing some of the work that we're doing to employees of our organization in that country. There's a digital workforce, which are the bots. Those are the ones that are automating some of the things we do. And then there's a contingent workforce, the so-called gig economy. These are independent contractors that are working for a variety of organizations, and we bring them in to work on a project, and then they go work on a project for someone else, and then we bring them back to work on another project. It's estimated today the gig economy is about 1/3 of the workforce in the US, and it's growing year after year. So the workforce is changing. Think about what that means for lifelong learning. I started my career at Deloitte. Deloitte had training internally. I actually was a trainer internally for Deloitte. We had Deloitte University. But if you're in the gig economy, you don't necessarily have an employer that's providing you with that training and development. Those people are going to need to get that learning elsewhere. We also can think about helping those organizations that have current employees in their training and development activities. So if we look at sort of what lifelong learning looks like, and this is a graphic that I've used for many years, but it's starting to change a little. So early in someone's education, sort of at the undergraduate level, they need broad training. They need education exposure to a variety of areas. Why? It helps with creative thinking. It helps with being able to identify problems and think critically. But also from the learner's perspective, it helps them find something they're passionate about. So I started off in liberal arts as a biology major. But I took some economics courses and decided, okay, I'm going to shift into business. But I wouldn't have found that unless I were doing that broad studies. Early in your career, though, you need deep specialized training. So I wanted to go into accounting in order to sit for the CPA exam. They require a minimum number of accounting credit hours. So I had to go back and get my master's of accounting in order to have that deep specialty knowledge. And we see it in other areas, finance, data analytics. These are areas where early in your career, when you're doing the heavy lifting, you need that deep specialized knowledge. As you advance, though, you start to manage people, you need management skills. You start ultimately perhaps to manage organizations, you need leadership skills. So that's the typical progression. What's changing a little today, we talk about the broad knowledge versus the deep knowledge. Today, even though we typically progress from broad to deep to broad management and leadership, we find you actually have to go back and do more deep knowledge occasionally. So if I wanted to go back and practice accounting today, what I studied 30 years ago in the classroom is not going to be very useful. Today I need data analytic skills. So I would need to go back and do some deep learning in data analytics. So we want to think about what the learner needs over different cycles of their career. Broad versus deep skills, and perhaps recycling or reskilling themselves on a periodic basis. Technology is moving quickly. There's technology that's complementary. There's technology that's potentially competitive. The way we deliver learning is changing. This is a study AACSB did, also available on our website, of millennials. In this particular case, it's folks aged 21 to 40. And we talked about their interest and exposure to online learning. We found that 54% of the respondents had had at least one online or blended course, and 26% believe that a certificate or digital badge is as valuable as a formal degree program. So they're looking for shorter pieces of information. They're looking for achievements along the way, not necessarily a degree. Not to say the degree is not valuable, but they're looking for other things post-graduation. So these are folks that have exited their undergraduate programs. You know, we have traditional learning. That's how we've always taught back when I was in the classroom, either case study, PowerPoint presentations, where we're talking to the students on a live basis. Today, we're doing much more experiential learning on a live basis, so working on case studies, working on projects during class time. We have online education, so the ability to take courses electronically, including in that we have MOOCs. The one that's up and coming is micro-learning. So the Innovations Committee of the board this week had a presentation on micro-learning. And after just an hour of training, we were actually creating mini courses on our iPhone that then could be consumed on an iPhone, which, as you know, everybody takes their phone with them everywhere. And so it's a ubiquitous device. People want that bite-sized learning that they can do periodically throughout the day. So all of these are tools that can help us keep engaged. So if you think about it, instead of thinking about students and alumni, if you think of them as learners that you're going to help service throughout their careers, you want to keep them continuously engaged. So bring them back for a MOOC-style course so they can get engaged. They're continuing to learn with you. Perhaps offer them some micro-learning opportunities so that they can continue to get education throughout their careers. By being better connected with what we used to call alumni, we'll be better in tune with their needs, the types of learning opportunities that they and their employers are looking for. So it's important to stay connected. And then we can identify needs and we can provide solutions. You know, I think of some examples. So I mentioned the transcript earlier. Because of the gig economy and because people don't stay with the same company for their entire career, who's keeping track of someone's lifelong learning transcript, sort of their cumulative knowledge, other than perhaps LinkedIn, which is self-reported? There may be an opportunity for us to provide a lifelong learning transcript for our students, our learners, our former students, sorry, and more importantly, provide them with that continuous guidance of, okay, here's where you are in your career today, here's what you need to do to get to your career that you want to have in the future. So there are opportunities to engage in the lifelong learning of our former alumni. So we had a report that we published a couple of years ago that talked about the 5 major opportunities for business schools. One of those was lifelong learning. Given what we've seen the last couple of years, we think this is becoming more important. So what I would like to suggest to you is you start thinking about them, not as students and alumni, but think of your learners as lifelong learners. We're doing it as an organization. We had a new mission and vision and strategy map that we published about a year ago for the organization. And on that strategy map, we talked about who were the communities we serve, which is primarily business schools, but then indirectly we said we also serve students, business, and society. Well, we've just changed that to learners, business, and society. We have to think much more broadly. So with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Mahalo.